Protests are one of the many ways that people can exercise their political voice. Current examples of ongoing protests in the US have shown that there are definitely some current concerns around safety. If you're not familiar, these protests are related to ICE enforcement operations in Los Angeles, but have transferred over to other cities throughout the United States as well. Protests have been consistently occurring in various locations, but those who have never gone to a protest might find that the thought of joining that kind of political discourse is completely daunting to them. So today we're going to answer the question, how do you protest safely? We'll cover some of the risks you can encounter during a protest and what are the best ways to mitigate those risks to yourself and those who may protest with you. Hi, my name is Evan, and I've advised hundreds of people on traveling safely to some of the most difficult locations all around the globe. If you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe, and you can comment any questions down below. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was just making sure that you understand the law before you protest. This video is going to be a little bit US-centric, considering that's where I live and the recent protests that have been occurring in Los Angeles and other major US cities. So we'll keep it a little bit more focused on that, but should apply to other locations as well. So really one of the most important things to understand before you protest is what laws are applicable in that particular jurisdiction. So using the United States as an example, protests are protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution. Even with that protection, protests must remain peaceful, and oftentimes police will not allow protesters to block traffic or the entrances to public and private buildings. They may also not allow people to occupy public or private buildings as well. In other countries and cities, the laws are different in how someone can or cannot protest. So it's important to just know what those are beforehand, because the risk could be that you are illegally protesting even if it's peaceful, and it would be a significant risk for detention or arrest. It's also important to protest with an understanding of the local laws and what your rights are as well. So you should always understand what your rights are in circumstances where you're going to be in contact with the police or other people as well. The next point I would tell people is always let someone you know and trust where you're protesting, and make sure that you're checking in with them at regular intervals, especially at the start of that protest when you've arrived there safely and are all set up. And at the end of the protest, when you've left the area, you're far away from the commotion, and you're completely safe. You should always provide the details of where you're protesting to that individual, and just make sure that they understand, when the protest is supposed to start and end. This ensures that someone will come look for you if you become injured or detained for some reason, and you're unable to call them or provide them any further information. The next major tip I always would mention to people would be just bring appropriate clothing and supplies. So it's important in any protest that you wear comfortable clothing that meets the weather conditions and will allow you to comfortably stand and walk for longer periods of time. So a couple things that I would always bring to a protest that you're going to, and this is especially applicable if you're in a more southern climate or it's the summer where you are. Bring water, electrolytes, small snacks, and any medication that you may need in an emergency. So things like an EpiPen if you're allergic to bees or some other thing, insulin, anything that you might need in that circumstance. Other items that you should bring would be, signs if you want to carry a sign with you to protest, a mask to reduce public visibility, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute, sunglasses, and any other items that you might need. And then the most important part of this is do not bring any weapons whatsoever. No weapons should be brought to a protest, because the intent is that they will be a peaceful protest. The next point is just avoid confrontations with law enforcement. So law enforcement oftentimes will use popular crowd control techniques that they've used for generations, right? So things like tear gas, rubber bullets, less than lethal projectiles, which have been used a lot in these LA protests. And they sort of vary. A lot of times they'll be like extra dense foam, things like that will be shot out of some kind of weapon. And then, they could use their police clubs or batons. And then they also detain and arrest people as another source of control for a crowd. All of these present a risk of bodily harm to protesters. So just to note, tear gas is very hard to mitigate against. Glasses and goggles are not effective against tear gas as it enters your airways as well, and definitely will affect them as well. So unless you have some kind of full mask setup that can prevent, any sort of inhalation of the tear gas, then the likelihood that you're going to be able to prevent, getting affected by tear gas is very low. Rubber bullets, as another example, can cause severe bruising, lacerations, even in some cases broken limbs as well. So just keep in mind that they're also something that would be highly effective to someone. And then the last thing I would mention in terms of arrest and detention is that likely those may end with criminal charges. So you just got to keep in mind that when you go to a protest, there's usually going to be law enforcement, and confronting law enforcement outright is likely going to result in one of those things, which will have an effect on you. Now, whether that is your choice to do that or not, you are fully allowed to yell at law enforcement in the United States, right? That is your First Amendment right. However, when it comes to, blocking roads, things like that, that's where things can get more tense. The next point is about protecting your digital profile. So just make sure that you turn off Face ID or other forms of biometrics that you use to open your mobile device. So if it's a finger scanner or Face ID from your iPhone, you just want to make sure that that is not enabled when you're out protesting. Law enforcement cannot legally force you to open your device if you're detained in the United States. So it's important that they're not able to do it by just holding your phone up to your face. They may open it if they have a court-issued subpoena, but that is not going to be as common. And just keep in mind that other locations outside of the United States in different jurisdictions are always different. So it could be that they have more power over opening your mobile devices. Understand that if you post anything to social media during a protest, that could give away your location to law enforcement. So if you're worried about the fact that law enforcement may be trying to track down some part of the protest, then I would advise you post later at a different moment. And then the last thing I would say, CCTV, so closed circuit television cameras are all over the place. And especially if you're in a public area where often protests take place, you should assume that cameras are capturing your image, and in some instances, they could be using facial recognition software too. That happens a lot in areas around government buildings, and you should assume that those kind of technologies are in use. So this is where you may want to obscure your identity if you're really worried about them knowing that you're at that particular protest. And that's why I mentioned bringing potentially a mask, a hat, sunglasses that can help protect your identity. And then the last part of this that I would just recommend is focus on your placement within the crowd, right? Many individuals will want to be right at the front lines, right in the thick of it, which is admirable. But I would just say it's important to have a way to exit that crowd relatively quickly. And it's very difficult if you're in the very center of that crowd. So what I would always advise people is try to remain to the sides of the crowd, monitor your potential exit routes. And if there is some kind of violent incident that will require rapid exit, make sure that you make your way to that area. Stampedes can occur in large groups. So if there's some kind of mass shooting at a protest, or this goes for even like a concert, being at the sides of the crowd can definitely help you get to an exit a lot quicker. That being said, if you do find that you're in a crowd of people, running for it, you don't want to go against the crowd, right? It's like pushing up against a raging river. The likelihood that you're going to fall and get highly, highly injured from that is very significant. So you want to continue with the flow of the crowd and make your way to a location that you can exit from that crowd safely, but going with the flow of the crowd. Protests overall are an extremely important part of the democratic process. I encourage those who wish to peacefully protest to do so, but remember the tips that I just discussed. Protests can be a powder keg for potential violence, especially in times of political partisanship like we have in the United States currently. And it's just important that you're extra careful when you engage in these kind of protests. So please go out, peacefully protest, but just remember these tips to try to keep as safe as possible. If you have any further questions, please don't hesitate to comment below like I mentioned before, and thanks for watching everyone.